Yo guys, I've got a spark which I'm going to use to ignite the fire for a late Film Fridays here on the channel. This video took a lot longer to edit than I was expecting, so hence the lateness I alluded to earlier. Ooh, Lego tall neck models, but that's not what we're here to talk about today even. Today we're here to talk about the 12 theatrical Star Wars movies, and we're going to be ranking them specifically. So for 12 Star Wars movies I'm talking about are the ones that were theatrically released, so we are not going to be including the Star Wars Christmas special here, even though we all know where the Christmas special would land on this ranking list. And we're also including films outside of the Skywalker saga, which means the Clone Wars movie, Rogue One, and Solo. So that makes 12 films total for me to rank today, and boy am I excited for it. So without further ado, let's just get straight into it. Last place is the obvious choice, the Clone Wars movie. This was released theatrically in 2008 to precede the animated series as it dropped on Cartoon Network. This movie feels exactly like what it is, a TV show movie, meaning it's a TV show just extended beyond its welcome for 90 minutes straight. It feels as though this was made as a publicity stunt to get people to watch the show as they lazily stitched 4 episodes of the show together. And they're not even 4 good episodes neither. This means we spend the first 30 minutes with a plot that feels completely disconnected from the rest of the movie, and there are constant 3-act structures throughout where you can tell that each 30-minute segment was designed to be viewed as its own separate episode. This structure is messy and poorly paced, and because it's designed to be part of a massive TV show, we don't have time for character development, as that will be slowly rolled out over the entirety of the TV show rather than the entirety of the movie. So the characters don't go through any sort of progressive arc in this independent film, mind you. So as such, you very quickly tune out and don't really care about the conflict our characters are being put through. Padme is randomly introduced in the 3rd act. In a normal episode structure, this wouldn't seem so jarring, as her plot would have been carried throughout the entire episode, but having it show up here, out of left field, just for the final act, is rather jarring indeed. This is early into the show's timeline as well, so Ahsoka hasn't had her key character development yet, which makes her such a fan favourite character. Instead, she's here being disrespectful and overconfident, which is irritating and makes us as the audience care less about what happens to her character. The show also hasn't quite figured out Anakin and Ahsoka's dynamic yet, and it shows throughout the entirety of this movie, as their personalities don't really bounce off each other just yet. They each just kind of say something and then the other responds. We don't yet have that close-knit banter between the two that the relationship dynamic is known for. Speaking of Anakin, for me his duel with Dooku is just about the only redeeming part of this so-called movie. It does a great job showcasing how powerful Dooku is, as well as foreshadowing Anakin's shift to the dark side, as we really see his anger come through in this fight. So all in all, the only good thing about this movie is how it makes me appreciate the better episodes of Clone Wars much more. If this movie was instead released at the end of the show's run and the movie was the last 4 episodes, it would probably be the top of this list, but stitching together 4 early episodes in a very contrived and unfulfilling way just leaves you feeling cheated by the movie. We all know the problems with episode 2, the awful CGI effects and the awful dialogue standing out above all else. Anakin and Padme's romantic chemistry feels like a stale loaf of bread, only that it's much less appealing than actually eating one of those. The dialogue is laughable and poorly executed, as the actors clearly don't care about the script or the characters they're currently playing. They're just is no passion behind this project whatsoever. Its main redeeming factor is the memeability behind the movie. It's fun to laugh at how garbage this film truly is, with its plot being built on coincidences and the plot holes being seriously thick, so the entire story feels unfocused, confusing, and you're left feeling as though there was just a better story to be told. So the film doesn't even live up to its full potential. Between shit acting, shit visual effects, and shit writing, there is very little redeemable about this movie, and the greatest sin of all is that it's incredibly boring. I tune out when I'm watching this film since I don't care about the characters and the conflict therein. It's easy to lose interest as the pace of the film is uneasy, so you never find yourself hooked, and you kind of just wish for the dialogue to be over and move on to the next action sequence already. Speaking of which, that is for one redeeming factor to this film. The action is generally quite good, and the Geonosis battle feels large in scale, and it's amazing to soak in all of the incredible action choreography and background detail. This truly feels like an alien planet at war, and it's captivating. If only the rest of the film was able to shut up and give us more of these fun action sequences. Rise of Skywalker, or Rise of Garbage as I prefer to call it, is an absolutely abysmal ending to the Skywalker saga. First of all, the film has an identity crisis as it can't remain true to itself. The entire message is about how what matters is the actions you do now, the family you've gained along the way, rather than the past you've come from. Yet after all of that, Rey throws away where she actually came from. Apparently it does matter because she's a Skywalker now, so family name and legacy means everything to her. Kung Fu Panda 2 had the exact same message but executed it to far greater perfection. I'd way rather be watching that movie. Instead, I'm stuck with Rise of Garbage that has one redeeming factor, just one, and we all know what it is. The fucking Han Solo and Kylo Ren reunion. The dialogue there is powerful. It serves Kylo Ren's character arc extremely well, making it a well-written scene which is nostalgic, emotionally poignant, and something to truly put a smile on any fan's face, or just any viewer's face for that matter. It's such a beautiful scene, and it's got universal appeal so that anyone can watch this scene and be impacted by it. It doesn't just have to be Star Wars fans. As for the rest of the movie, like episode 2, the dialogue is absolute garbage. They repeat certain lines thinking it's the Mozart of screenwriting.
Oh, they fly now! They fly now! They fly now!
Even though they've been flying now for ages, since the Clone Wars in fact, so why is this a surprise exactly? The dialogue wasn't funny the first time, it doesn't give the characters any additional chemistry. The film is so worried about you getting bored that it throws whatever shit it can at the screen, hoping to maintain your attention somehow. And so, the same pieces of dialogue are repeated, thinking that, well, it was funny the first time, so it can only get funnier the second 2 times, and yet you'd be wrong with any assumption along those lines. The film goes for the polar opposite tone and style of The Last Jedi, which I understand is a very divisive film, but it does still have its fan base. So the fan base for that film are immediately alienated in this one because of the tonal juxtaposition, which they liked beforehand but can no longer see it reflected, and that also makes it a problem for when you watch these films back to back. It makes this film feel like it comes from a completely different franchise. In other words, it makes this the black sheep of the family, and it's very jarring when you watch the films in order, mind you. It's so busy trying to correct upon Last Jedi's mistakes that it fails to realise the mistakes of its own. The plot is a series of coincidences which benefit our characters, so their victory in the end feels cheap and unearned, but it has planet hopping so you can never really invest into the current location you're at, and it means the pacing is incredibly uneven, breaking your immersion constantly within this world. So Rey is the biggest problem I have with this film, where she's incredibly unlikable throughout the film's entirety, and then Finn and Poe have no character arcs to invest into whatsoever, as they've already grown from the events of The Last Jedi, and they feel as though they are here out of necessity rather than actually adding anything to the film. For the actual making of the film, Disney paid to transport the entire cast and crew to the desert, only to use the green screens anyway. This is highly damaging to the environment, and it didn't benefit the film, so like the rest of the film itself, I'm questioning what even is the point. The film can't even commit to itself, it fakes out deaths multiple times, only to revive characters or reveal that they were fine the entire time. Leia's death is actually much less hard-hitting because of this. You're not really convinced she's gone, and it comes structurally into the plot at the time where other jokes are being made, so the tone laid out isn't serious. As such, you don't take the death serious either. The only emotional beat behind its death for me is the external factors from the film. Watching this and knowing that Carrie Fisher actually passed away in real life, that is what is emotional about it. Phantom Menace might be a garbage Star Wars film, but at least we're starting to get to the garbage Star Wars films with redeemable qualities. Phantom Menace does star the single most annoying comic relief character in film history, Jar Jar Binks irritates you and lessens for tone, as you can't take anything in this film seriously when it's immediately juxtaposed by Jar Jar's antics. The film is slow-paced and focuses on dull elements of the Star Wars universe that we don't really care about. After all, it's an endless universe with space wizards. The last thing we want to focus on are sky politics. It makes the film feel needless in the grand scope of the Star Wars universe. Plus, like the other films spoken of already, the film has some terrible dialogue choices. This comes from the writing, obviously, but the actors clearly aren't interested in making the best of the terrible writing. They seem bored by their lines and they just want to spit them out rather than speak them with some actual truth or commitment. But enough of all that, it's time to be a little more positive. The pod racing sequence is unique. It's nice to see this rather than the usual Star Wars action set pieces, and it really puts you into this world because it's something unique to the Star Wars universe. There are even stakes behind the race as well, which really captivates you during the sequence, and it makes it all the more intense and exciting because of it. Qui-Gon Jinn is an excellent character as well, which I wish got more screen time, but I'm glad if anyone was to kill him off, it could have been one of the coolest villains of film history, mind you. Everything about Darth Maul is awesome. His skin is black and red for Pete's sake, and that presents him as a very intimidating and dangerous force to be reckoned with. The music and the choreography in his duel with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan is intense and really damn fun to watch. I see myself returning to this scene quite frequently because it's so well captured. Yes, the film has its very obvious downsides, a slow-paced and uninteresting story which fails to gauge the actual interests of the audience, awful dialogue and acting, but it has one of the best lightsaber duels in Star Wars history, and the pod racing sequence is incredible. The Last Jedi is easily the most divisive Star Wars movie, as we've alluded to already. Being not the biggest Star Wars fan myself, I couldn't care less about certain decisions and fates of characters, so long as it serves the story to craft a well-made film. I must admit, The Last Jedi is indeed a well-made film, and because I find myself as more of a film fan than a Star Wars fan, that one simple fact alone is more important to me. But even with The Last Jedi being objectively a well-made movie, it still does some very stupid things, especially with the writing. The plot holes and contrivances are through the roof. It's not a flowing story. What happens in the Rebellion plot doesn't directly impact Rey's plot, so there is a disconnect there, and the events just kind of happen, leading from one thing to another, and it's all one bad coincidence after the other. It feels like the true enemy of the film is bad luck. Unless the plot calls for a convenient means to save our characters with that sweet plot armor, suddenly a good coincidence comes out of left field to save the day. So the events of the narrative don't really flow, and every narrative development feels unnatural. So why exactly do I think this is a well-made movie? Well, firstly, characters go through incredibly compelling arcs. It's good character writing, even when the dialogue does miss the beat. The sound and the visual effects are stunning. You're really pulled into this universe thanks to the cinematography, and the action choreography is the best we've seen in a Star Wars movie. It's an absolute blast to watch, to put it mildly. The entire film does rely a little too much on your subversion of expectations. It does make the plot unpredictable, which is good, as you're excited to see where the plot will go next, but that sacrifices what makes Star Wars special and what people want to see. Without a balance between subverting expectations and reaching them, you alienate your entire fan base by splitting them. Sometimes it's good to have a universally hated film. At least episode 2 is acknowledged universally to be one of the worst of the series. At least this way the entire fan base can agree and remain strong together rather than being divided and causing arguments amongst themselves within the community, which doesn't benefit anyone. All the controversy puts an even larger negative image onto the film. I don't let external factors impact my enjoyment of the film personally. If the director is a terrible person, that isn't the fault of the film, so I don't let that external factor impact upon it. That's not to say Rian Johnson is a terrible person. My point is that I won't sway my opinion of the film itself just because of internet bullies who can't accept that The Last Jedi has some talent and some passion behind it. You can tell it does because the movie is still incredibly well made. The character choices, however, abandon everything Star Wars fans love about the series, and when the series is so incredibly important to you, I understand that betrayal. So Last Jedi is automatically knocked down for being a terrible Star Wars movie, even if, as a movie independently, it's not so bad. You can say what you want about The Last Jedi, at least it's memorable. The controversy surrounding it deems it so, but Solo has the greatest sin of being completely forgettable. The moment the credits roll for this film, I immediately forget what film it was I just watched. This means every time I rewatch it, it feels like I'm watching the film for the first time all over again. This film does nothing not already seen in other Star Wars movies, and it underestimates the value we put into things within the Star Wars universe. We don't care about small things like Han's golden dice to need to know about their entire origins, so we don't need an entire movie telling us about all that. The film reminds you of a greater potential for Star Wars outside of that time gap between episodes 3 and 4. There are so many greater stories to tell, and yet we're stuck with this film instead. This is the greatest shame of them all. The only thing memorable about this film is Darth Maul's cameo. This was clearly shoehorned in because of Disney's writers' concerns about the impact this film would leave on audiences. They knew an iconic character such as this would surprise viewers, as such it would leave an impression on them. And they were right, but it doesn't make his appearance feel any less jarring. I'm writing this script directly after I rewatched the movie, and even now I can barely tell you what happens in it. If this story is too small scale and personal when compared to the large and vast worlds presented in the other Star Wars movies, it's no wonder that by comparison this feels mundane and slow paced. This film also doesn't do anything inherently wrong besides being unmemorable. The characters are likeable and have good chemistry, the script understands its purpose, delivering a film perfectly executed for what it needs to be. The visuals, like any other Star Wars movie, are outstanding and really draw you into this world. Even something as everyday as a train is warped to feel like it's part of this universe as it defies gravity and twists around the tracks. The high sequence is a blast to watch, even if you'll forget it 5 minutes later. The cast is the most surprising part to me. Harrison Ford not playing Han Solo should be a mistake, but this casting somehow works for me. So overall, the film is average. So incredibly average that you forget you've even watched it 5 minutes later, but at least unlike other Star Wars movies that are memorable because of the film's weaknesses, this one doesn't have anything which stands out as bad or terrible, so it's simply just left to be forgotten. Force Awakens is easily the best of the Disney Star Wars trilogy, even though the narrative plays out very similarly to Episode 4. It's effectively a New Hope remake with a blend of new characters and legacy characters. It's the chemistry between those legacy characters and the new characters which works so well about this film. Unlike the other Disney Star Wars trilogy films, the dialogue is an absolute trash. The story moves forward at an excellent pace, and it's a really entertaining movie, since you're not constantly cringing at the dialogue or frustrated by the jarring narrative turns or character decisions, as this film plays it extremely safe and makes it likeable to as many people as possible. It's got a broad audience, this film, and it's perfectly enjoyable, even if it is just an Episode 4 remake. So between the perfect blend of representation, nostalgia to keep the original fans happy, actual chemistry between characters, and fast-paced narrative beats, we have the least most terrible Disney Star Wars movie of the trilogy. The main flaws are the blaring similarities to A New Hope, and this makes the narrative rather predictable, and it gives you no sudden surprises which take you off guard, making this film far less memorable than the other Disney Star Wars movies from the trilogy, even if this one has more tolerable writing and characters. This film also has some great emotion poured behind it, just as Rey is being promised a job by Han Solo as he's becoming a bit of a mentor to her. He's tragically killed off by Kylo Ren, his own son, and Chewbacca's reaction to this is so heartbreaking, and it makes the final lightsaber duel incredibly personal and intense. The choreography is exciting, and when you pair that with the excellent visual effects and camera work, what you have is an experience. As a Star Wars film, you experience, especially when those exciting and emotional beats are elevated by the phenomenal soundtrack. And kicking off that top 5 will be Return of the Jedi. That's right, the original trilogy in its entirety are easily within the top 5. These first 3 films are just that good. The Return of the Jedi is barely the weakest of the 3. The lightsaber duels are longer, topped with intense choreography, and the personal emotion behind the fight can be seen, and it adds such intensity to the fight. It's phenomenal character building for Luke, and it eventually leads to Darth Vader's redemption, concluding upon one of the greatest villain arcs in film history. It's a great message to be sending to the audience about the power of family and never being too far gone. It leaves an impression on you which makes the entire ending put a smile on your face and stick within your mind for years to come. All the loose narrative beats and characters are tied together neatly and in a manner which feels natural and not at all forced, which just adds further to the satisfaction of the ending, I suppose. There are intense moments where you're truly led to believe that the rebellion might lose, so this keeps you excited throughout as you constantly want to know how our characters will be getting out of this precarious situation. As for the Ewoks, I don't think they're nearly as bad as people let on. I find them pretty cute personally, and their resourcefulness is inspiring, and it's thanks to them that the Rebellion even won in the first place. Just because they're not your traditional Star Wars characters and they're made more so to appease the children in the audience doesn't make them inherently bad. Plus, several years later we were shown how much worse it could have been with Jar Jar Binks, so the Ewoks by comparison are so much better. In the end, I don't think there was really enough loss, besides for Darth Vader and Yoda obviously. We feel those same emotions alongside Luke during his final fight, as Mark Hamill does such a great acting job, but overall this film just doesn't win me over as well as the other films in this ranking list. Whilst our heroes are put in danger and we're left wondering what might happen next, it never really takes it to the same extremes as the other films do, leading to that smaller feeling of loss I talked about earlier. Boba Fett also goes down a little too easy, and I find the entire desert sequence in the film a little underwhelming, to be perfectly honest, though it does do a great job at showing Luke having grown as a Jedi. So this film is fantastic, but there just so happens to be 4 others within this franchise that I find to be better. And that begins with Rogue One. Narratively, this film moves a little too quickly, so we're not given the time to slow down and truly learn about these characters and their backstories, which does make the emotional impact of their personal loss a little less poignant later in the story, but you still commend the bravery in telling this story in the first place, especially the loss of almost all of our characters at the very end. It's dark and leaves a lasting impact on you long after the credits roll, even though the entire ending is kind of overshadowed by Darth Vader's appearance. He's incredibly brutal and skilled. It's the most intimidated I've ever felt watching Darth Vader just obliterate everything on screen. No wonder why the pace constantly moves forward. The action in this film is put at the forefront, and I couldn't blame them because the filmmakers scripted such excellent sequences. This film has some of the best action of any Star Wars film to date, even when compared to The Last Jedi. Despite being basic and mostly one-dimensional, all the characters still have at least one quirk to set them apart and make them more memorable. The film does have extremely personal loss, and this is meant to hit you hard emotionally, but it's hard to do that when you've barely been given the time to invest into these characters and truly care about them. And the film has the same planet hopping issues as Rise of Skywalker. Just as soon as you reach an awesome location, you're not given enough time to truly soak in the atmosphere, because before you know it, we're planet hopping again. So with a slightly slower pace and more reliance on character, the emotional beats could have hit much harder. But this is still some of the greatest Star Wars action we've ever seen, and the ending has guts. The darker tone sticks with you, making you wish that other Disney Star Wars films could have been this awesome as well. Revenge of the Sith is easily the best trilogy capper of all of the Star Wars movies. The main reason I love Star Wars in the first place is because of the epic lightsaber duels, and this film has those in abundance. Yes, they're flashy and completely unrealistic, as weapons like these don't need to be waved around in that manner, but that doesn't take away from how entertaining the choreography actually is. Visually, they present Anakin's arc very well, and Hayden Christensen's acting has improved significantly for this film. It's a film that really plays up the idea of the Star Wars prequels being an epic space tragedy. What happens to all the Jedi is nothing short of horrific, and it really plays up the darker tone of Star Wars, later expanded upon by Rogue One. Watching all of these Jedi die one after the other without break or remorse is beyond heartbreaking. Every time you watch this, you want things to go differently. You want Anakin to remain within the light side of the Force and to not lose his way. Every time you think it'll be different, and then the tragedy inevitably plays out, and you're left with such dread. This constant juxtaposition of emotions keeps you thrilled throughout the entire film, and it's extremely memorable. R2-D2 is also a badass in this, which is always a win in my book. Knowing about the events that take place with Ahsoka's arc during the final 4 episodes of the Clone Wars whilst these events take place is really what adds a lot to the characterization here. We now have greater context of what Anakin is losing. It's very easy to sympathize with him, as you want so desperately for him not to become Sith, but ultimately your hopes are in vain, though the writing issues still prevail, but they're not nearly as prevalent here. It's a shame that cringy dialogue couldn't even elude this film, but the writing is still phenomenally better, capturing the internal conflict within Anakin alone is captivating character writing, and the lightsaber duels and other action sequences are fantastic, dare I even say the cherry on top of the cake, because you can't help but feel excited by this film, especially when your emotions are constantly being juxtaposed between hope and then the tragedy of the Jedi occurs, leaving you heartbroken. What an incredible movie indeed, but it still can't top the obvious 2 Star Wars movies. Most people would put Empire Strikes Back as their number 1, and frankly I couldn't blame them, but I find A New Hope to be slightly better, and we'll talk about why later, but for now let's focus on episode 5. This takes everything awesome about A New Hope and expands upon it. The characters remain consistent to themselves whilst also growing individually. Han Solo and Leia's chemistry is perfectly captured to make what would normally be dull and quiet scenes entertaining. You're made to care about these characters and relationships building up between them, and this is what makes it all the more heartbreaking when they're left in a terrible situation after having lost. The Empire really pulls out all of the stops to show their might and brutality here. This darker ending really sticks with you, and once again you're left admiring the bravery in telling the story. The reveal that Darth Vader is Luke's father is so well handled, and it's so iconic. This moment is ingrained within the greatest moments of film history for anyone who's watched it. Without the knowledge of the prequels, this twist truly takes you off guard as you don't see it coming, and you're left mesmerised by the film because of it. The lightsaber duel is also much longer in this one. It's intense and fun to watch the choreography, as it's clear that Vader is just toying with Luke at this point. He loses his hand, showing that there are consequences to actions, similar to how Han is frozen in carbonite. The whole film, our characters are being pursued, and the lack of downtime for them to relax correlates with us as an audience, who also don't get time to let up with our excitement, you could go as far to say. The introduction of Yoda is also iconic. His lines are well delivered and very memorable indeed. The character's size and expressions are hilarious, and his pairing with Luke is perfect for chemistry's sakes. The 2 different plots don't overpower each other neither, they're balanced and directly impact one another, as Luke's decisions are influenced by his friend's situation, and since either one is just as compelling as the other, you never feel as though you're at a loss when you cut from one plot to another. Empire Strikes Back represents everything great about sequels, and yet I still can't bring myself to put it over the original. A New Hope is one of my favourite films of all time, let alone my favourite Star Wars film. This sets up the world of a tyrannous intergalactic empire where only a small rebellion stands a chance at putting an end to them. This small scale really puts them as the underdogs, which is far more compelling than an entire universe at war with itself in the prequels. Underdog stories are ones I personally feel a great connection to, which is why I find myself so compelled by this movie in particular. The visual effects are stunning, and even to this day they hold up. Just the idea of creating a space epic like this in the 70s inspires filmmakers still to this day, and I question how they did it when films to this day still don't look as good as the original Star Wars does. Very few films have changed the world in the way Star Wars has. But as for the film itself, Luke is a little whiny, and that can become quite annoying, but this is minimal and not nearly as bad as the writing of other Star Wars characters. This is also where my flaws for the film begin and end. The technology and locations really feel alien, like we're actually observing this story from a galaxy far, far away, and the best part is how the initial score really hits you whilst you read the story setup. It's mesmerising, and you truly soak in all of the details of the text as it flies across the screen because of the grand scale of the music, and more importantly, its intergalactic feel. There are few soundtracks out there, few scores as iconic and as memorable as the Star Wars one. It just really hits you with that scale all at once, and that's why this film despite being about a small rebellion, feels large in scale, and it feels like part of an ever-expansive world, I suppose. So between the production design, for technology, costume, and location, what we have is a world that really feels lived in and real. It's beyond compelling, and it draws you in. The characters have phenomenal chemistry with one another, their dialogue bounces off one another, and you're left with a smile on your face whenever these characters interact with one another. They even bring humanity to machines, with R2-D2 and C-3PO not feeling like mechanical beings, and instead humans, with constant banter that is comedic, and it always puts a smile on my face to see these two connected on screen together. It's one of the best cinematic friendships out there, especially since R2-D2 is my favourite Star Wars character, and here, he's the badass I know him for, which does indeed put a smile on my face. The film is very fast paced. Since we're invested into this world, we care for the characters and we feel that true sense of worry because these are the underdogs. They're playing outside of their league, so they need to be extra cautious to escape the evil grasp of this intergalactic empire. The character arcs are phenomenal. Han choosing to show up at the best possible moment to save the day and turn the tides of battle will always leave me speechless. It's such an inspiring moment that provides me with goosebumps every time. It's hard for me to ramble on and on about Star Wars without getting something wrong. As I've said already, I'm not the biggest Star Wars fan, though I do still love a grand majority of these movies for what they are. But in a universe as big as this, I'm bound to have gotten a couple of things wrong, so I do apologise to all of the Star Wars buffs out there, but I hope you enjoyed my personal rankings list regardless. Emphasis on personal. I find myself having a stronger personal connection to episode 4, which to me is the only reason it matters when putting it at number 1 over episode 5. And even episode 3, which I also have a strong personal connection to because the prequels came out when I was very young, and so those were the ones that I first watched. But when it comes down to A New Hope, there is so much more that I could ramble on about, especially Darth Vader's character. He's set up to be such an intimidating force, and his actions speak louder than his words, I suppose, because it's not just what he says which is intimidating, but it's what he does and how he says it. Tone is everything, and the deliverance of Darth Vader is so cool. No wonder why he's quite possibly the most iconic movie villain of all time. A New Hope easily has the weakest lightsaber duel of the entire franchise, and yet it's still my favourite Star Wars film, just because I really love the characters in this one. I love the setup, I love the narrative structure, and just the way how it so organically flows and meshes together. It's the perfect setup for a universe as vast as Star Wars. It's one of those franchises where its origins are much better than its conclusion. But that all being said and done, the next Film Fridays is going to be a double bill because we're actually delaying the Oscars video until next week, so I have enough time to catch up with a bunch of the nominations because there are a bunch of films nominated that I haven't watched yet. So in the next week I'm going to watch those, write the script, and then we're going to talk about the Oscar nominations. And the other video I will be making will be for video in dedication to my film of the month. Obviously January has came to an end now, so what was my film of the month for January? You can find out next week for hashtag Film Fridays. I cannot in good conscience end off this video without first thanking all of my incredible channel members whose continued support help make these videos possible. Without them, these videos would be near impossible to make, so from the bottom of my heart, I truly appreciate every last one of them. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, there are plenty of options on screen now to explore, and please consider subscribing to keep up to date with all my content. On that note, this video is coming to an